So, since you guys are the foundation for the Raptors, could you tell us what it was like trying to launch that team back in the mid 90s?
Well, I guess from my standpoint, it was like continuous work. I think for like a couple of years, right? Like we literally would be, I don't know, 70, 80 hours a week. I'm sure if you added up our hours, it would be exceeding any like allowances people would have for labor, right? Because you got to remember that John was 33, right? So we won it on his 33rd birthday. I was like a couple years younger,
Yeah,
but like everybody was under the age of 30. Like, and then the players were kind of not that far apart from us in terms of ages, right? And that's not necessarily the way it would always been, right? Because like Isaiah was probably, well, Glenn and Isaiah are probably the oldest guys, right? I don't know. Like
yeah,
it seemed like that to me, AC. Like,
Yeah, it would have been and maybe Al Quantz.
yeah, Al,
Al was
yeah.
probably older. Yeah,
Yeah, and we had some
yeah,
coaches that were super experienced that were helping us. But like, but when
yeah.
it comes to
Brendan.
the core of us as a group
Yeah,
of people, we were very young people, um, doing stuff we didn't like. We were making it up on the spot, kind of. Like I don't. We had more discipline than that, so that's unfair. But we weren't afraid to try to change things, and every part of the organization did it, right? And that was the cool part. So we worked hard, play hard, and I don't think we knew as much as we were accomplishing when we did it as we now look back and imagine. And I'll leave that with Ace.
yeah. So everybody was, like you said, Dave said, everybody was young. Most of us were unexperienced. There was only a few veterans on the team, and
yeah,
we knew some of those veterans would not be around either because they wanted to go play on more experienced teams or their salary was going to be too much. So we were kind of handicapped by the salary cap the first 2 years. I remember Isaiah was telling us in our reunion that our salary cap was under half of what the
Yeah.
normal player teams were.
yeah,
So everybody kind of knew that they were going to stay young and stay with players that didn't make a lot of money. So and most of us young players were in our second or third year. So I was in my third year. Damon was a rookie. Carlos was in his second year. Tracy Murray was in his like fourth year. Doug Christie was in like his fifth year. Walt Williams was in his fifth year. So it was a lot of us young guys that were there. Jimmy King was a rookie. And so it was like there wasn't a blueprint. So it was funny. We talked about it. We've talked about it much years later, but we talked about it at the time. Like nobody was like the leader, right? We were all kind of led collectively, and then there was no hierarchy of like, well, you got to do this because you're young. So everybody looked around like, hey, we're all in the same boat. So
yeah,
like, if somebody shot a bad shot, everybody was like, oh, okay, that must be what he's doing. I mean, what he normally does. So it was like trial by fire with a lot of things. But it was fun looking back at it that we accomplished so much, not having a blueprint right in front of it. Everything was done uh, pretty much on the fly, and things were happening that we look back years later and say, wow, we had a dance team, we had a mixed dance team, we had a non-gender dance team, we had a chef that Isaiah were having. We stayed longer for different games instead of just going and coming back. Sometimes we spent the night. We flew family in for different events. All things that weren't done at the time that are now done by many teams. And so, like at time, I tell people all the time, sometimes you do things you do not know what you're doing at the time, and you look back on it, and it's like, wow, that's what we really did. So, very unique experience. I'm glad I was one of the players, as many of us, that signed up for that, because there were a lot of guys who told Isaiah or told their agent, like, don't draft me, or I'm not going to Toronto, or I don't want to be in this
I was
situation.
just gonna ask
So a
about
lot of us, like ourselves, were like, hey, let's go make the best out of it.
yeah, because I was just going to ask you that about the image of Canada and Toronto being more of a sports team for hockey or baseball because of the Blue Jays and the Leafs and the challenges everyone had of trying to find their footing in the city for basketball. Because in the neighborhoods, basketball is very popular, but people outside of Canada, they wouldn't know that the city
Yeah.
would support this the
Yeah, like and like on the first games, like they were cheering at the wrong things. Like they were
yeah.
making noise when we were shooting free throws.
Yeah.
They didn't understand like lane violations and little minuscule rules things, and they didn't understand. So it was like we almost had to train them
That was
to
exactly
cheer
the
for
words,
us and
AC.
do things.
Yeah.
We
Right.
trained our fans. Absolutely, we did. We had to, but we didn't want to embarrass them in the process. Like we wanted to show them love, but then direct them to the way it was really supposed to be. And that's right. And like I would just say, when you have two leaders like Isaiah and John, that when a good idea gets presented, they recognize it and act upon it quickly. I think that's part of what created the environment we were in, because when we got a great idea, we moved resources to execute really quickly, right? So that it wasn't always planned exactly the way it went, but we took advantage of it. And I think the one thing is you have to go back to really the bid for the world championship of basketball. And even in Alex's book, it's not really stated what it did, because it was, Lincoln Alexander, an amazing Canadian African descent, who led the World Championship community board that we had for the 1990 World Championships, and he brought community leaders from every single major community, like that highest level in order.
Yeah.
And so we made connections through that. So every community, and every one of those communities got tickets to the World Championships, saw Shaq, right, and Penny, and and like a lot. That was Dream Team too, but man, I'll take Dream Team too as well. Man, I know there was only one Dream Team, but we had the second one here, right?
Yeah.
So that part of it generated, and we made money on that event. Like we actually,
Yeah,
I don't know.
and I would
guess we
say,
sold
Dave, like
5,000 tickets.
yeah, not to cut you off, Dave, but I would say that validated a lot of people to think that you could play basketball in like because me growing, I mean, I was in the NBA at that time. So, I watched that and I was like, oh, wow, they're playing in Toronto. Wow. Or they're playing, I don't know, where do you guys play? Toronto or Vancouver? I forgot.
No, we played some in
Team.
Hamilton. Yeah, and we played some in Hamilton. We played some in Toronto, and
So I'm like, wow, that's a cool city. Like, because we're seeing it on TV. We're like, wow, Toronto's cool. Like, that's Canada. Like those NBA guys are there. Like, why can't we be there? So I'm like, people probably don't give enough credit that validated basketball can be played there. And people can go there and travel and whatever. So I was like, man, if Shaq and Penny, those guys could play, then we can go there.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that's the one thing that did not happen in Vancouver, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't have the advantage of the connection to the communities, because look at the South Asian community. I mean, Superfan Nav, right? He was the first guy. What a sweetheart he was. When the sales guys were behind, he literally would buy more tickets to make sure the sales guys hit their targets. Like he was that man from the very beginning. A very generous man. But we were embracing fans from every culture. I remember in the World Championships, there was 10,000 people in Old Maple Leaf Gardens, and it was Croatia versus Greece. And like, I love hoops, man. And it was a fantastic game. Both crowds were fully decked out cheering. So it was literally 5,000 Croatians and 5,000 Greeks in the city of Toronto. Yeah. And it was all love. They don't cheer against each other. They were cheering for their team. It was a wonderful thing. And I'll tell you that when I was at that game and I came back and who's the guy I'm looking at the merchandise numbers and going, oh my God, did we ever sell a lot of stuff and make a lot of money on concessions, right? because it's a not for profit. We're trying to give money so we can rebuild basketball nets and courts and all that stuff, right? Because we gave them $500,000 from that event. This city hasn't done many events like that have made that much money at that time frame. Put it into context. It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it helped. But that didn't happen in Vancouver, right? So you can go, well, that's not 100% maybe why they didn't succeed, but could it be part of the ingredient that made Toronto succeed? I think so. Right? The team has more fans across Canada now than the Blue Jays. And more avid fans. In other words, like 30% of Canadians say they're like hardcore. I watch for the Raptors. I love the Raptors. When Acie and I were starting out, man, that was not what we had. What we had was people willing to give us a chance. And we didn't price ourselves out of the market. We provided more entertainment. We knew we weren't always going to win, but we did not want people to go away disappointed.
Yeah,
right?
and we played well. We played well at home, and we knew we had to play well at home. Like, we knew that if we didn't play well at home, this thing could go sour fast.
Yeah.
So, we won the first game, which people forget. And we beat a pretty good Nets team, New Jersey Nets team that had some stars on there. And I think we set a record maybe of an opening night game. I think it was 30 or 35,000 we had. So, I mean, that was like nuts. Like nobody played. I think one time in my life in college, I played a game. I played an NCAA tournament game with 30 or 35,000, but like nobody ever played with 30, 35. I mean, that was unheard of. I mean, because my college, University of Iowa, the most is 15,500. And most college arenas are between 12 and 15. So, I mean, I have 30-something thousand fans there. It's like nuts.
So, and you could say, like, the Sky Dome was our disadvantage, but at the same time, we turned that disadvantage into an advantage by making it really inexpensive for families to come and enjoy that experience. And like that weekend, AC, when we had like 110,000 people over 3 games watch you guys.
I mean,
that was unbelievable.
It was fun to play there because people knew that from the Toronto Blue Jays. So it was like, oh, this is where the Blue Jays play. So we're like, wow, this is cool. So people would come, the teams would come and be like, oh, wow, this is where the Blue Jays play. It's like, yeah. So it was cool to play there.
Speaking about the Blue Jays, what were your thoughts on the Raptors winning the championship a few years ago? Because the city saw a drought of not getting a championship from either the Leafs or the Jays since the 90s, just a little bit after you guys launched the team.
Yeah, go AC first.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
All right. For me, I mean, it brought tears welling up in my eyes. Particularly for me, because I feel like, having been in the room and been part of the strategy that won it, writing the mission statement for the team, which included great family valued entertainment, capable of winning NBA championships. Those were my words, and John and I together. And so essentially it was mission accomplished, right? And as I said to the group gathered to the reunion that we had, that the mission included family entertainment. So it wasn't just sport or basketball. It was broader than that, because we knew we had to have people, instead of going to Ripley's aquarium, instead of going to a movie, they had to come and see us at the Raptors. And our players and Isaiah knew full well they had to entertain people to do that.
Yeah.
So for me, like, being a former player, like, whenever your team does well, like, that's where you want to be in life. So like me playing for the Celtics, and then the Celtics winning it with Paul Pierce and KG, and then, now with Tatum and Brown, like, that kind of validates what I did. So like, when I tell people, are like, hey, you play for the Celtics, right? It's like, oh, okay. Well, you must be somewhat kind of good, because the Celtics are in the playoffs. Same thing with the Bucks, same thing with the Raptors. So at that time, it was a great time for all 3 of my teams, former teams, because they all made it to the playoffs. They all had deep runs. So, like, it's great. So, like, you know, the Celtics won, like I said, last one with KG.
Yeah.
Then, you know, Raptors won, so that was great. And then the Bucks won with Giannis. So that's great. So I'm like, I'm in hog heaven, right? All my teams, my former teams have won a championship in the last, you know, 10, 15 years. So Toronto, I think, was the last piece. And so that's great for me. I think the fans deserved it. They stuck in there on the lean years, you know, with Vince and Chris Bosh. And, you know, I'm glad I'm a Kawhi Leonard fan, so I'm glad he signed up to play. And, you know, I was kind of disappointed he didn't come back to re-sign. But yeah, it just kind of validates your career, you know, when your former team wins it.
As our Black Country Club is known as the barbershop, there's all kinds of discussions in there about who the first jersey is that should go up. To me, there was never a doubt because, as Andy said, you put Toronto on the map. And I always say this, you led the All-Star game in voting. You weren't in New York. You weren't in Los Angeles. This thing called the internet, you couldn't just click away and vote for some guy 20 times in a day. You had to take your backside to an arena, punch a hole in a ticket, and put it in a box. And you led from Toronto. So putting Toronto on the map. And I always thought, yeah, Vince's number should be the first one. And it is, fittingly. What are you most looking forward to this weekend?
Oh, I mean, I want to comment on that because the first time it happened, couldn't believe it. I think All-Star Atlanta was the one that did it for me because I was leading vote getter.
That was 2002.
And Michael Jordan was also there.
Was retiring, yeah.
And he was retiring, and it was his last All-Star game, and I had more votes than that guy. You know, and it was just, it was just amazing to see that I had that many people appreciate me as a player and as a person. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant.
You were too modest. Wait, hold on.
I get it, but that's
you
Michael
were too
Jordan,
modest
man.
to understand.
That's the guy that did this.